Hey guys, good to see you again. So we are moving on now. We're talking about democracy and the first part of our democracy unit and problems, issues, how it works, etc. Is us talking about something known as the Haudenosaunee, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy, or the people of the Longhouse. When we talk about the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy, or the people Longhouse, we're talking about the same thing. We're talking about originally it was 5 tribes or 5 bands coming together, and then eventually becomes a 6th part to it. So these bands came together under what is known as the Great Plan of Peace. So prior to the Great Plan of Peace, which was created by a man by the name of Haudenosaunee, we had these different bands warring against each other. And that was really no way for these different bands to coexist and live with one another. It created instability, it created conflict, etc. So Haudenosaunee came up with this idea called the Great Plan of Peace, where we saw a number of different aspects to it. So under this banner known as the Haudenosaunee, right, the Iroquois Confederacy, or the people of Longhouse, what we saw was a division of powers amongst the different bands. We saw equal participation in politics, which meant that all people were granted the right of the franchise. And of course, we don't see this in the United States of America now that we've looked at the civil rights movement, guaranteed up until really, the Reconstruction era, post 1865, after the American Civil War, did write into the American Constitution, right, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. But really, it wasn't until 1964, with the passage of the Civil Rights Act, do we really see that become a reality. And then, guys, also in the Iroquois Confederacy, we see guaranteed rights and freedoms. We see the rule of law exist in this particular Confederacy, right? They had a constitution which all members of the Iroquois Confederacy were bound by. They had to abide by it. So the story goes that when Ben Franklin was looking for a way to unite the 13 different states under a constitution, he actually traveled to the area around Syracuse, New York, and he met Haudenosaunee and the different members of the Iroquois Confederacy, and he thought, wow, here we have 5 tribes instead of 13 states, or 6 tribes in this case at this time, coming together under one banner. The banner that the Americans wanted to unite under was known as the United States of America, and their Constitution. And how do we do it, right? How do we have these very different states in the case of the United States? How do we have these 13 different states come together under one federal banner, right? And basically the model that the story goes, the model that he used very much looked like the model that was used with the people of the Longhouse. So hundreds of years before the arrival of white people, right, European people, to this side of the world, the so-called New World, right, it's very much possible that we had representative democracy, rule of law, consensus decision-making, all the things that we think of as modern democratic ideals possibly existed with the Iroquois Confederacy. Now, I say possibly because there is historical disagreement on whether or not all of these things that are talked about with the Haudenosaunee were actually present, right? Some historians say, yes, absolutely, this is a fact, whereas other historians say that, we're not really too sure. There were some important differences between them. So anyways, in the video that you should have watched on the last module, it talks about how long before, right, possibly going back to the 1100s, right, maybe the 1400s, maybe the 16th, 17th, 18th century, But long before what we consider to be really the first great experiment in liberal democracy and freedom, right, that being the United States of America, there was very much a functioning type of governmental system. And the people of the Longhouse, the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy, it's sometimes referred to as the oldest living participatory democracy in the world because it goes back a long way. So there's the recognition that long before European settlement in Canada, in the United States, Indigenous or Aboriginal people developed sophisticated governing institutions which included consensus decision making. And this is what democracy is all about. Consensus decision making refers to the idea that, in Parliament in the case of Canada, in the Longhouse in the case of the Haudenosaunee, we would sit down amongst the different provinces or the different bands, and they would talk about different aspects of governance. They would reach agreements, they would talk, they would deliberate, right? All the things that we see in the House of Commons, in the American Congress, we see in the Haudenosaunee, right? And the argument is, and the last point on the screen here is that the proposal for the 13 colonies to come together under this thing called the Constitution after, of course, their war against Great Britain, which started on or after the 4th of July and their Declaration of Independence way back in 1776. These 13 colonies coming together, right? And, give and take between the states and the federal government very much looks like the give and take that existed between the different Iroquois tribes, right? And the Great Plan of Peace, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy, right? Their charter that they came up with. So, yeah, guys, it is very possible that, long before we had the United States of America being the first so-called democracy on this side of the world, there in fact was something that existed long before it, right? And we can't forget about the contributions to the way that the world operates that came from our Indigenous brothers and sisters long before us, right? So yeah, that's the Haudenosaunee, guys. Peace, love you, and we'll continue looking at different aspects of democracy here, okay? Stay cool.